Okay, so today we're diving into Fooled by Randomness.
By Nassim Taleb.
Yeah, by Nassim Taleb. It's a fascinating look at how randomness really shapes our lives, especially when it comes to things like the financial markets.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I think it's especially relevant for our listeners, whether they're, prepping for that big meeting or just trying to understand the world a little bit better.
Absolutely. Yeah, this deep dive should give everyone some really valuable insights into how to think about risk and decision making.
Yeah, definitely. And, it's interesting how Taleb kicks things off with this story from ancient Greece about King Croesus and Solon.
Yeah, a good ancient Greek story. Always a good place to start.
Right. So Croesus was this super rich, powerful king.
Okay.
And he was basically like, hey, Solon, who's the happiest man you've ever met? Like fishing for compliments, basically.
Classic Croesus.
Totally. But Solon, kind of a wise guy. He's like, nah, I'm going to talk about these regular folks who lived virtuous lives and died heroic deaths.
Oh, so he did not say Croesus.
Not even close. And Croesus was not happy about that.
I can imagine. So what was Solon's point? Like, what was he trying to get at?
He was basically saying, hold your horses, buddy. You can't judge a life's happiness until it's over. Like, you never know what randomness might throw your way. Even the richest, most successful dude could be brought low by, some totally unexpected event.
Yeah, that's a good reminder for all of us, no matter how much we think we've got it figured out.
Totally. And, it connects to this idea that we often mistake luck for skill.
Which seems to be like the central theme of the book, right?
Yeah, Taleb really hammers that point home. We see it all the time. People have a little success, and suddenly they think they've got it all figured out. They write books, they give TED Talks. Everyone wants to know their secret formula.
Right.
But a lot of times they're just riding a wave of randomness without even realizing it.
Yeah, especially in the financial markets.
Yeah.
Which brings us to one of the most interesting examples in the book, the story of Nero Tulip.
Ah, yes, Nero. A brilliant mathematician turned Wall Street trader.
And he made millions by betting against the market.
Which is pretty counterintuitive, right? But Nero wasn't trying to predict, which stocks would go up. He was more interested in identifying those rare events, the ones that could really shake things up, and then figuring out how to profit from them.
So he was playing the long game, focusing on those low-probability, high-impact events.
Exactly. And he was extremely risk-averse. He was perfectly willing to take small losses to avoid the possibility of a catastrophic one.
Okay.
But here's the thing. While his success was impressive, Taleb argues that a big chunk of it was simply due to Nero being in the right place at the right time. He got lucky during a particular market cycle.
So it wasn't necessarily all skill.
Right, which is a good lesson for all of us.
Yeah.
Don't be fooled by dazzling success. Always consider the role of luck and avoid just blindly copying strategies without understanding the underlying context.
Okay, so don't just follow what someone else did because they might have just gotten lucky.
Exactly.
Got it.
Now, to really drive this point home, Taleb contrasts Nero with another trader named John. Okay.
John was all about those seemingly safe, high-yield bonds. Everyone thought he was making smart, low-risk investments.
Right.
But then the Russian bond market crashed, and well.
Oof. I can imagine what happened next.
It wasn't pretty. John learned the hard way that even the safest bets can blow up in your face if you're not careful.
So is Taleb saying that all investments are risky?
Not exactly. It's more nuanced than that.
Okay.
The point is that both Nero and John were successful due to randomness, but only Nero seemed to truly grasp how big a role luck played in it.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So how do we start to see past this illusion of control, especially when it comes to something as complex as the financial markets?
Well, Taleb introduces this concept he calls skewness.
Okay.
And he uses this example of survival time for patients with a particular ailment. Imagine the median survival time is 8 months.
Okay, so that's the average.
Right. You might think, okay, most people live about that long.
Yeah, that seems logical. But what if the distribution is skewed? What if some patients live for years while others die much sooner?
Okay.
If you only focus on the average, you're missing a huge part of the picture. You're not seeing the full range of possibilities.
So how does this apply to the stock market?
Well, investment returns can be skewed too. People see the average return and think that's what they can expect. But they often underestimate the potential for big losses, those rare events that can wipe out their entire portfolio.
So basically, past performance is not indicative of future results.
Exactly. It's like that turkey who gets fed every day and thinks it'll last forever. Then Thanksgiving comes along.
Yeah, poor turkey. So are you saying we should never look at historical data?
No, not necessarily,
Yeah.
but we need to be aware of its limitations. Which is why Taleb is a big fan of Monte Carlo simulations. It's like running a computer program that generates thousands of different scenarios for how historical events or market movements could have played out. This way you start to see the range of possibilities, including those black swan events, the rare, high-impact occurrences that nobody sees coming.
So these simulations help us see that history could have unfolded in many different ways.
Yeah.
And the single path that actually happened was just one of many possibilities.
Precisely. It challenges this idea called the problem of induction, the idea that we can confidently predict the future based on past events. Monte Carlo simulations force us to consider alternative histories, which is a really powerful tool for understanding the role of chance.
So we need to be wary of drawing conclusions based solely on historical data, and instead approach things with a bit more skepticism.
Absolutely. And that skepticism is essential when you're trying to distinguish between noise, those random fluctuations in information, the meaningful signals in the financial markets. So many investors make bad decisions by overreacting to noise. They see a stock dip and panic, or they see a stock soar and jump in without thinking.
So how do we learn to ignore the noise and focus on the signal? Where do we go from here?
Well, that's a question we'll tackle in the next part of our deep dive. Stay tuned.
Can't wait.
Yeah.
Okay, welcome back to our deep dive into Fooled by Randomness.
Yeah, it's
We've been talking about how much randomness really influences our lives, especially in financial markets.
for sure. And it can be a bit unsettling to realize that.
Yeah, totally. It kind of makes you question like how much control we actually have.
Right. So where do we go from here? How do we make good decisions when randomness is always kind of lurking in the shadows?
Right, exactly.
It's not about eliminating randomness. You can't really do that.
Right.
It's more about understanding its influence and figuring out how to navigate a world where luck plays such a big role.
Okay, so how do we do that?
Well, Taleb offers some practical advice for this.
Okay, I'm all ears.
First, you got to embrace skepticism.
Yeah.
Don't blindly trust trends or past performance. And be careful about expert opinions.
Yeah.
Always question assumptions.
Yeah.
And look for evidence before jumping to conclusions.
Okay, so don't just take things at face value.
Exactly.
That seems like solid advice for life in general, not just investing.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Second, shift your focus from outcome to process. You can't control whether you win or lose,
Right.
but you can control how you play the game. Make thoughtful decisions, manage your risk, and stick to your strategy even when things get tough.
Okay, so it's about having a plan and not letting your emotions get in the way.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Easier said than done sometimes.
Definitely takes practice. And third, be prepared for unexpected events. Black swan events happen. Markets crash. Life throws curveballs. Don't bet everything on a single outcome.
Right.
Diversify your investments, have a backup plan, and be mentally prepared for setbacks.
So it sounds like Taleb's suggesting a kind of stoic mindset, accepting what you can't control and focusing on what you can.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Taleb actually draws a lot of inspiration from Stoic philosophy, which emphasizes resilience and rational decision-making, especially in the face of uncertainty.
Which brings us back to that story of Croesus and Solon.
Right.
Croesus was blinded by his current wealth and power, while Solon warned him about the fickle nature of fortune.
Exactly. Don't get complacent when things are good. Stay humble, stay vigilant.
Stay vigilant.
Okay, I like that. Now remember, a lot of our thinking is based on flawed assumptions about randomness. For instance, we love to find patterns even where they don't exist.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure. Think about how we consume news. We often hear things like, the market went up today because of X, or this stock is going down because of Y. But sometimes those explanations are just stories we tell ourselves to make sense of random events.
So you're saying we shouldn't always take those explanations at face value.
Right. Be aware of what Taleb calls the narrative fallacy.
The narrative fallacy.
We love to create stories that fit our biases. It's comforting to think there's a clear cause and effect for everything. But the reality is often much messier and more random.
And that kind of connects to this idea of noise versus information. How do we separate those random fluctuations from the meaningful signals?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? There's no easy answer. But Taleb suggests focusing on long-term trends and not getting too caught up in short-term fluctuations. Don't panic over every dip in the market. Take a step back and look at the bigger picture.
So it's about keeping a cool head when everyone else is losing theirs?
Exactly.
But this raises another question for me.
Yeah.
If we can't fully predict the future, how do we make decisions? Especially when it comes to something as complex as the financial markets.
That's a great question. And Taleb argues that by understanding the limits of our knowledge,
Okay.
we can actually make better decisions.
Yeah.
We need to focus on strategies that are robust to randomness, strategies that can weather a variety of scenarios, both good and bad.
So instead of trying to outsmart the market, we should be thinking about how to protect ourselves from its inherent unpredictability.
Exactly. One example is diversification. By spreading your investments across different asset classes, you're less exposed if any one investment goes bad.
Makes sense.
Another example is hedging, which involves taking positions that will offset your losses if a particular event happens. It's all about managing risk, not eliminating it entirely.
Right, okay. And that reminds me of something else we discussed earlier, survivorship bias. We tend to focus on the winners, the people who made it big,
Yeah.
and forget about all the others who tried and failed.
Right. We only see the survivors, which distorts our perception of success. It can make us think that success is more attainable than it actually is, and lead us to underestimate the role of luck. We need to be mindful of that bias, not just in finance, but in all areas of life.
Yeah, for sure. It seems like Taleb's background as a trader really informs his perspective.
Oh, definitely. He understands the psychology of the markets and the dangers of overconfidence.
Yeah. And speaking of psychology, there's another bias we should be aware of. Confirmation bias. This is the tendency to seek out information that confirms our existing beliefs, even if it's wrong.
Oh, yeah. We've all been guilty of that at some point.
Oh, for sure. So how do we overcome it?
Well, awareness is the first step. Actively seek out information that challenges your viewpoints, even if it makes you uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Be open to the possibility that you might be wrong.
So it's about cultivating a sense of intellectual humility.
Exactly. Humility is essential when dealing with randomness. We need to be aware of the limits of our knowledge and be ready to adapt as new information emerges.
Okay. So we've talked about this stoic approach to randomness.
Right.
What does that actually look like in practice?
That's a great question, and one we'll delve into in the final part of our deep dive.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Fooled by Randomness by Nassim Taleb.
Yeah, we've been talking about how much randomness affects us.
Especially in finance.
Right, and last time we were talking about how a stoic approach might help.
Right, a stoic mindset. So what does that actually look like in practice?
Well, Stoicism is this ancient philosophy that emphasizes virtue, reason, and living in accordance with nature.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that. But how does that apply to like a world full of random events that could throw us off course at any moment?
It's about recognizing that we can't control everything.
Okay.
But we can control how we respond to those events.
Yeah.
So imagine a world full of noise and distractions, things we can't control. A Stoic would say, focus your energy on the things you can control, your thoughts, your actions, your reactions to events.
So it's about choosing how we respond to the world around us.
Yeah. It's not about ignoring the outside world, but it's about recognizing what you can and can't change.
So instead of trying to predict the unpredictable,
Right.
we should focus on building our inner resilience.
Exactly. A Stoic wouldn't spend their time worrying about whether the market's going to go up or down tomorrow. Instead, they'd focus on making sound decisions based on their own goals and risk tolerance. They'd have a plan, but they'd also be prepared to adjust it if needed.
Okay, so again, it's about focusing on the process,
Yeah.
not the outcome.
Which is often beyond our control anyway.
Right, and this applies to all areas of life,
Oh, for sure.
not just finance.
Right. So say you're working on a project and it totally fails. A Stoic wouldn't dwell on that or blame other people.
Exactly. They'd try to figure out what happened, learn from it, and move on. So it's about taking responsibility for your own actions, even when things don't go as planned.
Yeah, having a sense of agency in a world that can often feel chaotic.
Right. And it's about accepting that failure is part of life. Nobody's perfect.
Everyone makes mistakes.
And in fact, those setbacks can often be our greatest teachers.
Which reminds me of that survivorship bias we talked about.
Right.
We often only see the winners,
Yeah.
not the people who tried and failed along the way.
Exactly. So Stoicism can help us reframe how we think about failure. It's not a weakness, it's a stepping stone.
Okay, so how do we actually cultivate the Stoic mindset? Is it something we're born with, or can we learn it?
The Stoics believed that virtue could be learned and practiced. It involves things like mindfulness, self-awareness, and a willingness to challenge our own assumptions.
Okay.
It's about understanding what's truly important to you and living in accordance with those values.
So are there any specific things we can do, like exercises or practices, to build that Stoic resilience?
Well, one classic Stoic exercise is called negative visualization. Okay.
It sounds kind of counterintuitive, but it involves imagining the worst-case scenario for a situation.
Why would we want to do that?
Well, the idea is to mentally prepare yourself for the possibility of setbacks. By facing your fears head-on, you reduce anxiety and build resilience.
Interesting.
You're less likely to freak out when things actually go wrong.
So you're basically getting comfortable with the idea of things not going your way.
Right.
Okay, what else?
Another important practice is gratitude.
Okay.
Take some time each day to appreciate the good things in your life, no matter how small. It's about recognizing the abundance even amidst challenges.
So even when things are tough, there's always something to be thankful for.
Exactly. And remember, Stoicism isn't about suppressing your emotions.
Okay.
It's about understanding them, accepting them, and then choosing how you want to respond to them. You always have a choice.
So it's about recognizing that we have power over our own responses.
Exactly. It seems like Taleb isn't just trying to teach us about finance, but about how to live a better life.
Yeah, for sure. He's challenging us to think differently, embrace uncertainty, and find meaning even when things are chaotic.
Exactly. And he's reminding us that we have more control over our own happiness than we think.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Fooled by Randomness, what's the one thing you want our listeners to remember?
I think the biggest takeaway is that we can't control everything, but we can control how we respond to what happens. By embracing skepticism, focusing on process, and developing a stoic mindset, we can navigate the unpredictable world with more confidence and resilience.
That's a great way to put it. And for our listeners, think about one area of your life where randomness might be playing a bigger role than you realize. How can you use these stoic principles to deal with that uncertainty?
That's a great question for all of us to consider. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
We hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, stay curious, and may the odds be ever in your favor.
Thank you for tuning in to the Power Book of Podcasts. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join our growing community. Click the bell icon so you never miss an update. We have so much more inspiring content coming your way.